I'm kind of like the King Kong in my house, okay? You know, like Kong always shows up and will help a buffalo out when it's in need or whatever? Well, my cat somehow got himself stuck between the blinds and the window itself. Yeah, I kind of had to go rescue him, and I'm just saying, I'm basically Kong. All I'm saying is that ape is literally me. What's up, everybody? D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be doing my review for Kingdom Kong, the Godzilla vs. Kong prequel comic. I never reviewed it, so it is time for me to review Kingdom Kong so we can find out what Kong was up to before the events of GVK. And there's no better way to read this comic than with the random bookmark from the Skull Island anime. Alright, the MonsterVerse continues in comic form with Kingdom Kong, bridging the gap between Kong Skull Island and Godzilla vs. Kong. Actually, I guess technically it's kind of bridging the gap between Skull Island, the birth of Kong, and Godzilla vs. Kong. This is the MonsterVerse comic that it took me the longest to get to. It's really the MonsterVerse entry that I sat on the longest before starting it. Like, I didn't read it until this year, a couple weeks ago. A couple weeks ago was the first time I ever read it. The reasons is just because, first of all, I was on hiatus from YouTube when Godzilla vs. Kong came out, so I didn't really have time to get to this comic. I just had other things going on. And then I didn't enjoy Godzilla Dominion that much, at the time anyways. I've kind of come around on some aspects of it. Go check out my review, which I just did where I talked about it, but I've kind of come around on some aspects of it, but Godzilla Dominion was not my favorite, so I was a little afraid to jump into Kingdom Kong just because I didn't want it to disappoint. Finally, just because I'm really annoyed with the way Legendary is handling the expanded universe. I'm really kind of sick of them cherry-picking details that they want to acknowledge and letting everything else fall to the side. It's either canon or it's not. It's just that simple. I get really frustrated with how poorly they've integrated the comics into the actual MonsterVerse itself, so I'm happy to see some changes were made with Godzilla X Kong, and then I went back to give this a shot, and hey, it was kind of worth it. This was written by Marianella with art by Zid. Zid returning from Skull Island, the birth of Kong, which makes this feel like a true sequel to that comic, definitely connects it to that, and also makes it feel like a true expansion of the MonsterVerse. As I talked about in my previous reviews, like when I reviewed Skull Island, the birth of Kong all those years ago, Zid's artwork just captures the style of the MonsterVerse in a way that none of the other artists for the MonsterVerse comics have even come close to, so his comics, to me, feel like the only true sequels visually. They're the only ones that feel more visually consistent with the MonsterVerse, which I really appreciate. I love his artwork. Also, shout out to this comic because it's the simplest story by far from all of the MonsterVerse comics. This one is the simplest story, which is actually kind of a refreshing change of pace. If I was to rank stories in terms of their simplicity, Godzilla Dominion is pretty simplistic, okay? But that one you still can kind of read into some things a little more. This one's just right to the point. It's a traditional narrative. I wouldn't call Dominion a traditional narrative. I would say that it probably goes Kingdom Kong, Dominion, and then the birth of Kong in terms of their simplicity, which I like. I like that stuff. Getting into the plot here, Audrey Burns remembers back to when she was deployed with G-Team alongside her friend, Captain Tam Nassar? Don't know how to say that. Back in 2019, it was an unknown mission at the moment. In 2021, in the present day, Audrey finds herself on a new mission for Monarch alongside Gibson, Diggs, Zunia, I don't know how to say that, and Nomura. They're headed to Skull Island. They make it. I like that. Monarch's established on the island. That's good continuity right there. Upon their landing, they're briefed by Colonel Joanne Edwards and Dr. Houston Brooks. Love to see Brooks returning. Love to see him continue his journey in the MonsterVerse. He is now resembling his King of the Monsters iteration, where he looks a lot more like Joe Morton than Corey Hawkins, which is cool. It's cool because it's consistent with the movies. I like that stuff, man. That's good stuff. I'm all about connection to the movies and consistency in the MonsterVerse, a cinematic universe which famously is not very great at consistency. They learned that a Hollow Earth vortex was discovered in a cave on Skull Island in 2012, but it's fairly unstable. Brooks is being pressured to have it opened and explored with drones before David Lind and his team can pilot their way through the portal on an expedition to Hollow Earth that we know is sort of the inciting incident for Godzilla vs. Kong. Happens before the movie, but it kind of sets that film in motion in a way. Brooks is reluctant to approve the mission just because a storm system left behind by Ghidorah in the Pacific has slowly moved towards Skull Island since they opened it up, drilling into the portal, and he worries that it'll soon merge with the Skull Island storm and destroy the island's ecosystem. I freaking love time tying back to Ghidorah. It was a big theory of mine before Godzilla vs. Kong came out that there was a possibility Ghidorah's storms could have messed with Skull Island in some way, and especially here, I actually thought that the opposite was going to happen. I thought Ghidorah was going to dissipate the storm surrounding Skull Island, which would open it up to attack from Godzilla. But then with Godzilla vs. Kong, when we saw the movie, and there was just a random storm that had overtaken and destroyed the island, I was really happy to hear that the canonical reason for that is Ghidorah. The havoc that he caused on the world, it's just great to see that continue. Makes Ghidorah truly feel like more of a presence in the MonsterVerse even after he's gone. Some soldiers encounter a massive spirit tiger, which was an unused concept from Kong Skull Island, and then they're saved by Kong. The thing looks fantastic. I love how ethereal it looks. One of my favorite Titan designs in the MonsterVerse, and I would love to see it in live action. Kong makes quick work of the creature snapping its neck and is observed by Brooks, who Kong allows to follow him around in a helicopter trailing behind him as he goes about his daily routine. Meanwhile, the pilots all have their training in the woods where they encounter a death jackal in a very quick cameo and then a mother longlegs, with tensions growing between Audrey and the rest of the team, but the inner team tension feels very forced. Like, I can't wrap my head around why they would be at odds with her. There's no reason. They're just upset because it's been a while since she's been in a plane. It feels very forced to me. It's manufactured drama amongst the group so that there can be some tension with the characters. There's probably a better way to go about that. Meanwhile, that night, Kong eats another squid from Kong Skull Island, demonstrating how large he's gotten, as now he's able to hold it in one hand and eat it like a snack. And then he tries to save another Skyer buffalo that's been crushed by a log, which I really like because it shows how caring Kong is as the king of the island, before a swarm of psycho vultures attacks Kong, forcing him to defend himself, which is pretty cool. I don't know why they put up such a good fight against him, but it does lead to the amazing visual of Kong using a torch as a weapon, which is so awesome. I really hope we get to see something like that in live action. And this is where Brooks realizes that the island itself might be trying to tell Kong that his time to leave is now, that Kong himself has outgrown the island. And this is where Brooks realizes he's not actually from the island. He must be from somewhere else, as we know Kong is from Hollow Earth, so yeah, it would make sense that the island wouldn't be big enough to support a Kong the size of him. So Brooks realizes that Kong himself is protecting the balance of nature on the island while also simultaneously disturbing it. Pretty sad to think about. All the while, Audrey is haunted by the memories of 2019, and we see in a dream sequence that a Titan called Camazotz, which I don't think was one of the 17 and counting from King of the Monsters era, surfaced during the mass awakening and attacked San Diego. I'm not sure where it surfaced from. Did it surface from Skull Island? I hope not. It surfaced and attacked San Diego along with an army of smaller bat-like creatures that follow in its way. Audrey and her team were in battle with these things, with Audrey breaking formation to take down a minion that's in the city, while her team gets absolutely obliterated by hundreds of other minions up in the sky, and then the main creature Camazotz itself, which ends with Nassar winding up in a coma as a result of this, and Audrey blames herself. Now that's a very traditional Godzilla story setup. We saw stuff like that in the Millennium era a couple times. If you just had it so that the rest of the team here was part of Audrey's squadron and they already knew each other, now the inner team dynamic would make more sense, because from their perspective she abandoned them once and is a bit of a loose wild card. It would make sense then why there would be some inner tensions between them, or if they were friends with Nassar in some way or another. That would create more tension between the groups, but no, they just don't like her just because they don't like her. Troubled because he can't make sense of the storm approaching the island, a series of violent tremors under the island, and a strange Iwi myth about a devil rising up to claim the world after it's swallowed in darkness, Brooks is forced to approve the drilling expedition of the Vortex. Meanwhile, Audrey does some sim training and does incredibly well, outperforming all the other pilots. Kong explores the old remains of an old temple, and the drill team explodes the Vortex, causing a supersonic roar to cry out, which disrupts all their comms, gets Kong's attention, and sends Audrey into a PTSD flashback. Brooks then realizes that Camazotz is the Titan the myth was warning about, and that they have just unleashed him upon the island, as the island is now swallowed by the now freshly merged storms, and because the Skull Island storm never moves, that anchors the new Ghidorah storm in place over the island where it will destroy it. The pilots then all bond over their shared Titan trauma. I like that they all have different experiences with different Titans. I like seeing that the MonsterVerse has consequences. And now, because they've all made amends, Audrey is promoted to captain of them and leads them into battle against Camazotz. Camazotz does appear and begins to fight Kong, with the drill team being evacuated by Monarch. Camazotz's ability to fly and his supersonic screech, which is able to disorient anything that hears it, gives him the advantage over Kong, which creates a really cool fight, because while Kong is physically stronger, he is at a disadvantage power-wise. Audrey disobeys orders once again, which her orders were to focus on the Hellswarm of smaller minions, but this time her unit agrees to join her, so they still stick together. She doesn't leave anybody behind. They actually join her this time, and they help her join the fight with Kong. They attack Camazotz directly to help turn the tides in Kong's favor. The shared effort leads to a pretty pretty exciting action sequence that culminates in Audrey going supersonic in front of Camazotz, taking advantage of the Titan's sensitive bat-like ears, causing it to get disoriented and allowing Kong to easily beat him up. Potentially Kong beats it to death, but it's not made entirely clear. Kong then punches Camazotz down into Hollow Earth where it came from. The Hellswarm follows and Kong rescues Audrey from her failing aircraft. Brooks then realizes that by drilling into the vortex they somehow magnetized Ghidorah's storm inward towards the island, allowing Camazotz to be released, and feeling guilty from this, he decides he's become too sloppy in his old age and officially needs to retire from Monarch like he planned to do back in 2012. He gives over command of Skull Island to Eileen Andrews, which sets up for Godzilla vs. Kong. They then meet with David Lind, Nathan Lind's brother from Godzilla vs. Kong, the one who's dead before the story starts, where Brooks warns Lind that entry to Hollow Earth through this portal is impossible because the portal's unstable and it'll get everybody killed, but Lind just doesn't care. He's happy to die so long as it means he gets the world one step closer to exploring Hollow Earth and learning the secret of coexistence with the Titans. Brooks reveals that he released Audrey so she won't be part of the expedition because she needed to return home to find out if Nassar is still alive. And it turns out Nassar totally is. They're alive. The storm starts to destroy and flood the island. Monarch attempts to evacuate the iwi. It looks like they're gonna do it successfully here, but in the Godzilla vs. Kong novelization, we actually find out the iwi choose to stay and die with their village, all except for Gia, who runs away scared and confused. And in the novelization, we find out Gia heads for higher ground, where eventually Kong saves her from the flood. The comic ends how most MonsterVerse installments do, with Kong returning to the temple ruins and discovering a cave painting. Of course, there's always cave paintings. This one depicting a battle between a Godzilla and a Kong. The painting clearly shows Godzilla atomic breathing the Kong, which may explain how in Godzilla vs. Kong, Kong knew to dodge the blue light coming from under the ship. He was aware that it was going to be a beam attack. I don't know how in the movie, but maybe this is how. Maybe in canon it's because he learned from this cave painting that Godzilla can do that. My general thoughts, first of all, is that I'm really kind of sick of the MonsterVerse's over-reliance on cave paintings. I hope they stop doing stuff like cave paintings and ancient rivals. It's just too tired at this point. Move on to something new, please. But overall, I actually think it's a pretty solid read. It's breezy with fantastic art and a nice momentum to it. The comic has generally decent world building, with small mentions to things like how the public has been informed of certain Hollow Earth portals in the Mariana Trench and in Antarctica. I'm not entirely sure why they'd be informed of that, but that does go along with King of the Monsters, where tons of Monarch documents were revealed. Although the public still doesn't believe in Hollow Earth, it's also possible that another way that the public learned about the Hollow Earth is because Nathan Lind published a book on it, and he wanted people to know about it, and nobody really believed him. I don't know why Monarch is still in denial of Hollow Earth at the start of GVK, considering they're all in on it here, but that's been a problem with the MonsterVerse. Since in Kong Skull Island, Monarch proved Hollow Earth, and nobody believed them even then. We also explain in this comic Kong's alpha status, how he came to officially earn that status, and we explain how the storm overtook Skull Island. Not all of this info is even needed or handled carefully though. It could have been handled more carefully. For instance, the Ghidorah storm system was supposedly created back in 2019 after Ghidorah fled Mexico, but Ghidorah went straight from Mexico to DC along the same coastline, so there wouldn't really be a need for him to cross Skull Island, creating a storm system nearby. I don't know why that would have happened. It kind of calls into the question the origins of this new storm. Had there been a little more attention to detail, they could have easily said the storm was created when Ghidorah left Antarctica. That would have made a lot more sense. This comic also has a few missteps, like that are a little more blatant. The whole thing where Camazotz is the Titan from earlier, I don't think that serves the story very well. It would have been better served if Audrey's team was one of the teams responding to Rodan, maybe either in the initial Rodan release incident, or they could have been involved in the Battle of DC against Rodan and Ghidorah. I understand that maybe they don't want to license those monsters for a Kong comic, in which case make it a different Titan that we haven't seen yet. Camazotz already having been to the surface kind of undercuts the reveal of the Titan in the first place, kind of undercuts the fact that it's still in Hollow Earth and is this ancient Titan that's gonna rise up and take over the world when the sun is blotted out. Camazotz already been here before and has been repelled before, so who cares? Also, it makes Brooks look kind of sloppy and stupid for not connecting the dots sooner, that the Titan that can't come out in the daylight is the same one that is the Titan that's gonna show up when the daylight is swallowed by the darkness. It's like, Brooks, put things together. The intergroup dynamic between the people not liking Audrey for some reason is also a little forced. Them not realizing she's suffering from PTSD until she has a hallucination in front of all of them is also kind of silly. Like, put some puzzle pieces together, guys. Kong's alpha status needing to be explained through his battle with Camazotz is also unneeded. It's fine, it doesn't change anything. Kong was an alpha Titan before he fought Camazotz. It's just that once a Titan officially challenged him and he beat its ass into the ground, that officially cemented him in Godzilla's eyes as an alpha, which is interesting to learn, but I don't think it was needed. The iwi evacuation as depicted here also doesn't make sense without plugging the holes through outside media, because the film makes it it pretty clear that they're all dead. Here they're shown evacuating, and in the novelization, that's where we learn that they choose not to evacuate. So it's kind of sloppy. This comic has a good human story with just a little too much going on with the backstories and the intergroup dynamic at times, but it's very solid overall with a great lead in Audrey and a great lead in Brooks. I really like to see Brooks explored more thoroughly here. The unstated idea, though, that all of these pilots die alongside Lind as they try and enter Hollow-Earth is a little morbid, and I don't know if the comic intentionally does that, but like if we track Godzilla vs. Kong's backstory, they're all dead. They all die trying to enter Hollow-Earth together. The kaiju story here is really awesome. It's actually probably the best out of any of the comics. This portrays Kong both as the fearsome warrior he is and also the very lonely guy he is deep down. I really like that we see a nuanced side of Kong. We get to see him both in and out of action doing some awesome things the whole time. He's always interesting to see, and I like that we spend so much time with him and the other Titans here. Camazotz is also an awesome Titan. I really love it. I always love to see flying monsters. I really like to see Kong fight flying monsters, so it's cool to see that happen. The bat-like inspiration for this guy is super cool. The supersonic ability is dope. It's different than anything else any of the other Titans in the MonsterVerse have. And the nightmare element of this creature is cool, but it doesn't quite live up to the expectations set by the marketing, where Camazotz was marketed as a Titan that creates nightmares. It's not really the case though. It's just one person struggling from PTSD, and then it can do a supersonic scream that people don't like to hear. It's still pretty interesting though. My overall thoughts and ratings is that I think this is probably one of the best MonsterVerse comics, right up there alongside The Birth of Kong and Godzilla Aftershock. I'll talk about if I think The Hunted joins them in another video, but those are probably my top 3 at the moment. Is The Birth of Kong is my number 1, and then probably this one, and then Aftershock. The writing is pretty solid here with only a few minor missteps that is really only me nitpicking. The art is amazing. Zid's ability to not only capture people's likenesses, but locations and action, all while keeping things cinematic and expressive, is super impressive. Zid has a way of balancing stylistic visuals with realism in a way that's very satisfying. Kong and Camazotz both really shine here as well. They're awesome to see. The action is also super easy to follow. It makes sense. The characters look on model all of the time. There's only a few strange 180 jumps that throw things off. That means when we jump from action facing one direction and then we flip to the other direction, disorients the viewer. It's not a big issue in this comic. It only happens like 1 or 2 times, but it is something I wanted to note. Other than that, this is why Zid is the peak of the MonsterVerse artists. He just understands the look of the characters, the look of the world, and he keeps things on model and looking great all of the time while keeping them dynamic and new and fresh. I didn't see many reused panels here like I saw in the other comics. I would argue that this is the best artwork out of any of the MonsterVerse comics so far, and then probably right behind that is The Birth of Kong. I think that Kingdom Kong actually lived up to the hype. I'd say it's a pretty good read overall. It is one of the more solid entries in the expanded MonsterVerse lore. I say 8 out of 10, and I'm happy to give it that. What do you guys think? Have you read Kingdom Kong? If so, comment below and let me know what your thoughts on it are. What do you think of the story of the time Kong became the Alpha Titan? Like I said, didn't need that backstory, but it's neat to know this is why Godzilla is so upset with him. Thank you guys all for watching. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. If you want to check out the Patreon, you can use the link in the description below, where you can get early access to content, access to the Discord community, and more. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time for the next one. D-Man out.